It is better to be right 1 out of 100 times than to be right 0 out of 0 times. That's from The Heart to Start by David Gaddafi. That is one of many books I read. So this is a quote book that I have. It's this little journal that I got from Barnes & Noble's many years ago. And anytime I read, I just write down little quotes that I like. I love quotes. They're like free advice from your favorite people that you'll never get to meet. And I like to collect them in that little notebook. So The Heart to Start is a book that helps you with your creative process and gives you a little bit of a push to help you start, because starting is the hardest part. It also says, just like with Stephen King on writing, that you don't need the book. It's so funny to me how they're like, the first page is like, you don't need this book to become a writer. And yet it's so helpful as well. But it's true, you don't need it. To be a writer, you need to write and you need to read. And those are the two ingredients. Finding time to write is probably one of the hardest things to do. But getting creative with that, it can be 10 minutes a day, and I find that once I get through about 10 minutes, I am able to write for much longer, or I find the time to get back to it as soon as possible. So I'm talking today a little bit about my writing process in the children's books that I've gotten accomplished so far, and I'm actually redoing them too. But my process is, I come up with the idea, at least this is what's happened so far. I have the story almost completely formulated in my mind, at least the first half. I'm not always quite sure how it's going to end. But then it kind of takes on a life of its own. It kind of comes to me slowly. And the illustrations pop into my mind at about the same time that I have written the story. And then I draw the illustration, and then another part of the story comes to my mind. So it's kind of like a back and forth with the pictures and the writing. So for the illustrations, I have a little example here. I tend to like to sketch, since I since I make up stuff from my head. I have a lot of sketching. I don't know if you can see that, where there's just a lot of extra lines that I don't necessarily want on my watercolor paper, because it comes through the paint sometimes, and it's not a good look. So I typically sketch out my idea, because I never know how exactly it's going to turn out, since I'm not following a picture. And then I trace it completely. Then I turn that tracing paper over, outline it one more time, and then I press, almost like a print, onto the watercolor paper, and then I color it in. So it's kind of a lengthy process, a little bit slow. Probably a new app would go much faster, but I kind of like the whole process, because it's very hands-on and I can come up with new ideas as I go. So I might get into actually having it on the computer somehow, and a little bit more of Adobe Illustrator or something. But for now, that is sort of my process. And the first book took me about a year, because I didn't know what I was doing, especially with the publishing part. I use Kindle Direct Publishing, and it took me a while to get used to that platform. Kindle Direct Publishing was CreateSpace when I started. So if you buy a first edition book, it's going to have CreateSpace in the back, because I was given it credit for where I printed it. But so this took me about a year. Once I knew what I was doing, though, this story popped into my head, and it took me about 3 months. And to me, it took a long time, but for people who saw these happen sort of one right after the other, it was kind of fast. So I was surprised about that everybody was like, "You're cranking these out so fast." And I'm like, really? It's taken me a long time. But they don't see the work. They just see the finished product. I would say I spent about an hour in the evenings working on the paintings and the story. After an hour, maybe an hour and a half, I couldn't really do much more. I just felt like I got a little burned out. And so to make it still enjoyable, I tried not to do too much, actually. So I'd go back to it the next day, because otherwise it's too tempting to be like, I can't spend hours on it every day, so you don't do anything at all. The best thing to do, I think, is to take breaks and to work on it when it works for you. I saw an advertisement for some sort of writing program, I guess, where just the advertisement was helpful. It gave a lot of information, and one of the things that the writer, or the teacher, I guess, was saying, that you need to be creative, especially when it comes to finding the time to be creative. And he picked the hours between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. because he had a full-time job and a family, and I was kind of like, no thank you. So it's really what is good for you, because I had an hour in the evenings. Now I have a couple hours in the mornings, but if you don't have a couple hours, 10 minutes is really good, because when I first did this book, the illustrations got drawn in between classes in college, and sometimes in classes when I got bored. I always sat in the back and just was, adamantly taking notes, right? And it just turned into drawing somehow. So that is one of the things about the writing process. It's so different for everybody, because finding the time is one of the hardest parts to creative writing, and you can find the time. You really can. It whether it is 10 minutes or 2 hours, I would say just keep it consistent every day. It doesn't have to be hard. In fact, one of the things I like about this book is how many artists said it is difficult, so difficult to be simple, to keep it simple, just right. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad. Just enjoy the first bad draft and move on. Celebrate those drafts. I hope that's been helpful. You can check out more about my books on awwerfel.com, or if you have any questions, you can email me at abigailwerfel@gmail.com, and I will try to link that below. So I hope you guys have a great week and have fun creating.